Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Mike Clear and I'm the Executive Director of Children's Strategy here at Orange. And today I am joined by my friend.
Hey there, I'm Crystal Chang and I'm the Executive Director of Student Strategy here at Orange.
Yes, and also the writer of all the words of what we're getting ready to say. Just saying. It's a true story, okay?
All the words.
All the words. So, Crystal, today we're going to have a conversation about plan your ministry year. And before, we're going to cover a lot of stuff today, okay? We got a lot of things we're going to dive into. But before we dive into those topics, I want to start with this first word here, okay? Plan.
Hate that word.
You hate that word.
So much.
Now, I have to confess to you, I love this word. And my guess is everyone who's tuning into this conversation is that there are those ministry leaders who love to plan, and then there are those who maybe like to have a little bit more flexibility. So if we were to take a vote for everybody out there today, I would say for those of you who like to plan things out, raise your hand.
And for the cool ones?
Right over there. Not cool, cool right there, okay? So let's talk about this tension between planning and about flexibility, okay? So let me talk to the planning side, because in the planning side, I like to talk about it in terms of a strategy, okay? So we define a strategy as a plan of action with an end in mind. And when we are leading a ministry, we're going to make some changes into our ministry. And before we go diving into changes, it's important to back up and ask some questions in regards to the things that you want to do. Again, we would say, what is your strategy for the changes that you want to do in your ministry? So a strategy is important because a strategy has the potential of combining your resources, whatever they may or may not be, combining your events, regardless of how many you do, combining your curriculum, whether you use a purchased one or whether you write your own, and combining your leaders into an integrated plan that allows you to lead kids and students to where you want them to go. That's why strategy is important, right?
And even though I jokingly say I hate having a plan, because I do kind of like to be like the Saturday night spirit led, like just save all the message prep until Saturday night. But the reality is, as I've gotten older, I've begun to understand how having a plan leads to having flexibility. Yeah. That when I have a strategic plan for the year and I know where we're going, if there's a snow day, if there's a festival in town and I need to rearrange my ministry calendar a little bit, I can do that. Whereas when I don't have a plan, I'm limited to the resources that were available Saturday night.
Yes, exactly. And I think the examples you gave are great, because if anything we've learned with COVID-19, it has taken everybody's plan and said, oh, that's cute. And it's just kind of thrown out the window. And now we're all asking the question of what is next. And so being strategic and having a plan means that your curriculum, your events, and your key influencers in your ministry, which are your volunteers and your parents, they're all working together on an integrated plan that leads kids and students to where we want them to be. So what we're going to do in our time together today is that we're going to help you develop this plan for the ministry year. So I'm excited about this conversation. So let's dive into the first part that we need to tackle when it comes to planning our year.
Okay, so anybody can throw some dates on a calendar. And honestly, for a long time, that's what my planning looked like, was just throwing the dates for the things I wanted to do on a calendar. And pretty quickly, I learned, probably like you have learned in the past, that there are certain events that I can't move because I want to have a student ministry event. The local high school is not going to move prom because I scheduled winter retreat that weekend. They're not going to move homecoming because I had a big message series planned. And so there are a few immovable dates in our communities that is really important for us to start thinking through before we even begin to build our church plan. Things like our school calendar. So for example, like your local school calendar is readily available on the website. It may look different this year than it did last year.
That's right.
Right? But it's available. That would be the first thing that I would start putting on paper, is where are my school calendars? And then also like community calendars. I know community for kids ministry is a big deal, right?
It's a big deal. And there are already community events probably already going on that you just need to lean into to see what those are, whether it's in regards to summer activities, 4th of July parade, or maybe it's in the fall time, it's going to be Halloween, or there's different things going on in your community. So you want to make sure to check those out, whatever those may be. But then not only is there school calendars and there's community calendars, but there's also a third calendar out there that sometimes we pay attention to a slice of it, but we don't pay attention to the whole piece. What is that?
So that's your overall church calendar. And I know as a student ministry leader, I'm tempted to only look at the student ministry calendar. I know, Mike, sometimes you may be tempted to only look at the kids ministry calendar. And that's where we tend to get ourselves in trouble, because I know that in student ministry world, sometimes we plan events and we don't talk to our kids ministry friends. And by planning that event, we have taken away all of your high school and middle school volunteers.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Whoops, my bad. Now, what's important with this is to go through this exercise of the school and the community and also the church-wide calendar, is because if we only plan our year based upon our small slice of what we just do, what we are doing is that we are then going to have to spend a lot of resources and time and energy to try to convince kids and their parents or students to, hey, I know you have this thing going on at school, or I know there's this big thing going on in the community that you would rather be at, but we're having our big, fill in the blank event to do that. And so you're making families or kids or students have to choose, but instead
and we say it in this way, right?
Yeah.
We say, if you really took your faith seriously.
That's right.
Right?
If you love Jesus and this church,
You won't go to that parade.
even though the whole town's going to be there,
Right.
you need to come to our event where you'll join just me, because everybody else is going to be there,
right.
So a way that we would say it as you work through this exercise, we would say it like this. It's here on the screen, okay? We would say, strive to complement, not compete against these activities that, like you said earlier, are already on the calendar, and they are not going to move for your event. So instead of trying to create something to compete against it, look at everything that's going around in your school and your community. Say, okay, now that we know what's going on in our context, how can we complement what is already happening with that?
And here is the beauty of complementing. These are events planned for you on somebody else's budget that you don't have to be in charge of.
Yes.
Isn't that great? So if there is a local community fall festival, or like in our community, there's the county fair.
Yes.
It's a huge deal and everybody goes. Why not plan a ministry meetup there, as opposed to inviting them onto our campus where
Absolutely.
we're using our budget and our resources and our staff and our time.
And you don't have to manufacture energy for that. It's just like, okay, we got to create some hype around this thing right here. And instead of doing that, just lean into the hype that is already going on in your community or your school to do that, and then lean into that. And again, complement it, don't compete against it. So you talk about all this stuff. So what does this look like? If I were to practically put this into practice here and do that, what you talked about, the school calendar and the community calendars, let's say I go on the websites and I find what those are, I know what are all church, what do I do with them then? That's where I'm a little confused.
Okay, here is the part I get most excited about, because I was a teacher and I'm a little bit nerdy and I love a worksheet. So if you don't, it's okay, hang with me for a second. Anytime that I have a lot of information that I need to think through or understand, stuff like planning your entire ministry year and every week of what you teach and all of your events, it's helpful for me in those moments to use what we would call a graphic organizer, which is just like a one-page graph to help you see all that information at once. So we're going to do that throughout today. We're going to make some graphic organizers together, and they're all going to be based around a really simple idea. It's this: draw an X. Go ahead and get a sheet of paper, pause this video, do what you need to do. You need some scratch paper like you did when you were a kid and you were taking a test and working out the math problem. That's what we're doing. And just draw a big X through the middle of it. The reason we're doing that, just like that, is it divides your paper into 4 quarters, which we would call fall, winter, spring, and summer. Now, maybe your ministry year starts in the summer because you promote all your 5th graders into being 6th graders in the summer, then fine, start it there. And our ministry year starts in the fall.
Okay.
So we're gonna keep that one on top. And then the next thing we're gonna ask you to do is just draw some circles.
Oh.
Yes, excellent job, just like that.
Picture pages. Do you remember that?
I don't know what that means.
I just aged myself. All right, that's fine.
So once you have circles on your chart, you're gonna have a chart kind of that looks like this for every area of your ministry. And we're gonna talk about each of those throughout today. So back to school and community and church calendars, because that's where we started. For that one, you're only gonna need 2 circles.
Got it.
Just like that. One for your church-wide events and one for your school and community events. And the idea is that you go ahead and write those in. So for example, right here for your fall season, you're going to write in, what are our big church events? Now maybe Maybe in kids ministry, that's
Trunk or treat.
Trunk or treat, right?
Yes.
And in high school ministry, that's for sure going to be some kind of weekend retreat, some kind of fall festival. There will be fire involved. It's going to happen sometime in here. And then maybe in our overall church, we have like a giving Sunday or a mission Sunday, a time when maybe our church leadership would be upset if we took all of the parents and volunteers out for that Sunday.
This is true.
So getting all those church-wide events here, all of the big school and community events in that space in the next circle, and then we would move on to the winter. All the church-wide events, all the school and community events in the winter, then the spring, then the summer, so that by the end you have a full sheet of paper and you have at a glance everything that's going on that you need to be aware of before you and I start planning our own events and our own teaching calendar and our own training events and that sort of thing.
Clarifying question.
Yes.
Do I write the events on the line or do I write them in these sections right here?
Valid question.
Structure guy asking the question here.
Mike, it's your world. And you can do whatever you want on your paper.
That's too much flexibility. I need you to give me some parameters. What do you do?
I would recommend writing them in the space, only because that gives you more space to write.
Okay.
You may run out of room on the line, so just go ahead and write your events there in the spaces
school
provided.
Community events in the fall.
That's right.
School community events in the winter, in the spring, in the summer, and then I go through my church-wide events just to map out what already is going on. So when I have all that on paper, what I love about that is that, again, that allows us to complement what is already going on, not compete. It allows us to look at something like this and find the intersections of where family and church can connect that already fits in with the natural rhythm that's going on with the family and in our community. And when we do stuff like that the chances of a family or a student or a child engaging with us in what we're doing exponentially goes up because we're leaning into what's already happening instead of creating something separate that competes against it, right?
So once you've done all that, you've kind of laid a foundation and you can see what events are immovable, what dates are ones we want to avoid. And finally, we're ready to start planning your ministry year.
Awesome. All right. So for this next section of Plan Your Ministry Year, we are going to talk about events, our events specifically. Okay. We got the school, we got the community, we've got the church-wide. So let's talk about either children-specific or student-specific events. And what is an event? An event really is anything special outside of our normal weekly programming. It requires extra attention, resources, energy, whatever it may be.
It's anytime there are corn chips ground into the carpet.
Goldfish crackers into the carpet as well to do that. So when it comes to events, at least in children's ministry world, there are some probably children's leaders that are watching this that are like, part of the requirement, they almost feel like a cruise director, that they have to have an event, 2 or 3 or 1 for every week to have something for kids or families to do together. And really what we want to help you do is to give you permission to not feel like you have to do this because events for event's sake is not strategic, going back to our word strategy there. Instead, we would say this, when it comes to these events, we would say you need to think about your events as creating steps, not programming. We're not programming for programming's sake. We're creating these programs to lead people where we want them to go. Again, a strategy is a plan of action with an end in mind. So every special event that we do, it is leading kids, is leading teenagers toward that. So let's talk about events for a second and let's play a game here, okay?
Oh gosh.
So we're gonna list out the typical events that happen in each of our different ministry areas, okay? So I'll say one, you say one, we'll just go back and forth and do that, okay? Focus here. Okay, so I'm gonna say family experiences.
What is that?
That's another video.
Okay.
What do you have?
I'm gonna say summer camp.
I'll see your summer camp and raise you a VBS.
I'll see your VBS and raise you a weekend retreat.
Oh, I'll give you a service project. Beat that.
I will give you an overnight orientation to the 6th grade.
Ooh, that sounds
How about
dreadful. Okay, all right. I will give you, how about an outreach event, like a community-wide Easter egg hunt. How about that?
Promotion weekend and graduation Sunday.
Oh, well, baby dedication. How about that?
Okay.
There you go.
You got a point. You got a point. The point is you have a lot of events. And in fact, as we get started today, we want you to go ahead and list out what are the events in your ministry at your church. Have a running list. What are all the things we need to think about and put on the calendar for this year? Now, once you have all those events listed out, I think it's really important to ask, what's the win here? Not even just in the event, but in our ministry as a whole. What's the win? I know in our ministry, the win is we want every kid to have an authentic faith. And we get there by every kid having a relationship with a consistent leader, a person of faith.
Yep.
So if that's our win in our ministry, I think we have to begin to ask the question, how does this event lead to that win? How does this event become a step toward every kid being in a relationship with a consistent leader who knows Jesus?
Yep. And going back again, what we talked about at the beginning of this is that a strategy is a plan of action with the end in mind. And our plan, our mission, if you will, is to lead kids and students into a growing relationship with Jesus. So what is going to be the best environment to do that? And like you said, we believe it's in the context of small groups. That is giving every kid and every student a place to belong and someone who believes in them. So when you look at this list of events that you are having, what you want to do is go through and say, okay, is this a logical next step? Is this a step, not just a program that leads a kid or leads a student to the primary environment where we want to be? Or is this an event that's going to take small group leaders and kids or students, and this overnight event is going to help foster that relationship even more so that in the weekly environment, that relationship just goes to another level. So it's looking at all of your events and saying that, is this a win? What is the win? And then what is the next step for this particular event?
I love that. I think what's next is probably the most important question we can ask when it comes to every event. And I'll tell you why I love this in student world, and you can tell me if this is true in kids world too. In student world, it is so tempting to make the point of an event a decision-making moment. So there were times as a volunteer, I felt like, why do we do Monday through Wednesday of church camp? Why do we just not skip to Thursday night decision moment, skip the rest of church camp because that's the point? And then as a volunteer, you walk away feeling like a failure if every kid didn't make a decision that night. And I love sitting with student volunteers and going, hey, you guys laughed until 3 a.m. You made memories you're going to talk about for the next 7 years together. You got the phone numbers of kids who have the phone numbers of you who are going to text you in the middle of the night 3 months from now. That's a win. And I assume that's true for kids too.
Yep. Like if you were having an event with small group leaders and their small the kids in their small group, like a bowling event where you bowl with small group in competition, and a leader may come and say, well, we didn't do anything. We didn't have an invitation at the alley, and maybe that's just not the best place to do it, right? But it's like you said, did you guys have fun? Yeah, we had so much fun. High fives, this and that. That bonding experience that you had for that hour or two at the bowling alley and having Coke and having a good time, that's going to enhance your small group time in the weeks to come, and it's just going to put you further faster relationally, and these events help you do that. So that's what I love about these strategic events that serve as a step. It's not just a program for a programming's sake. So
love that.
Now that we know that, let's go back to the X. Is it the X or is it the circles? What is it?
It's both. In fact, as we talk about the events at your church, go ahead and draw the X. Just like we did last time, you need a new sheet of scratch paper, draw the X, and then for most of us, we're going to want to draw 3 circles.
Okay.
And I know for like in our middle school world, those would represent 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade events. Okay. In kids' world, what would that look like?
Well, it depends on how you structure your ministry environment. So in preschool world, this could look different with babies and toddlers and 2s and 3s, or maybe it's just 2s and 3s and 4s and 5s. In elementary world, you can draw up to 6 circles to represent each grade, but I would maybe, because that's a lot of circles.
That's a lot of circles.
I would maybe do the 3 circles and do K1, and I would do 2nd and 3rd, and I would do 4th and 5th. Again, it depends on how you structure your ministry. And then in high school, the same exercise as well, right?
You would need 4 circles for high schoolers, but the point is, you have a circle for every life stage. And then go ahead and start plotting out the events. Maybe you have a 6th grade welcome weekend, or maybe you have a kids VBS that takes up the majority of this whole
season. You can just go ahead and write this
VBS.
Right?
And maybe that's a student event too. Maybe there's a winter weekend that's for some groups and not others. But the idea is to go ahead and get all those events plotted out onto this circle. And here's the questions you want to ask when they're all plotted out. First, does this event move kids and students in the direction that I want them to go? In other words, is it a step, not a program? Is it a step towards something else? If so, what else?
Another thing we can do is to look at these events once we put them all up here and just say, okay, this is a step, but we can also look at something and say, could we make this more strategic in what we want to do? So we talked about family experiences earlier when we were talking about kids events, right? A family experience is an environment where you put parents and kids together with other families to have a shared experience. And a lot of churches are like, hey, maybe we'll do one seasonally, but it's like a lot of churches do something at, I'm gonna go, where's the winter or fall? Christmas time. Where would Christmas be in here?
Christmas would be somewhere in the winter.
Okay, Christmas, right? And so at Christmas, we always do something Christmassy, whether it's special Christmas services or the kids get up and sing a Christmas song. And we would say, you're already putting a lot of time and effort into a kids' Christmas choir, but what if you just tweak that just a bit and you made that now a shared family experience that's more than just coming and watching kids sing. It's actually something that families participate. So you're already taking something that was on the calendar, you're already taking an event that existed, and you're just tweaking it a bit to make it more intentional, more strategic.
I love that you brought up Christmas. It made me think about this year, for example, our Christmas party is called the Let It Glow Party. It's an all neon glow party. So that would go on my events list is the Let It Glow Party. But I know that that's going to be a really high attended time in our ministry. So I want to plan the next 2 weeks very strategically. That's why I think it's important to plan our events even before we plan our teaching calendar, because I know I've got a big event. I know I'm going to have the attention of a bunch of students, maybe outsiders, maybe new kids. What do I want to say to them right after that event in the window before they start to fade out attendance-wise?
Totally agree. So if we've listed out all of our events and we've transferred them here to this paper, depending on whatever grade we're working on to do that, then we would say, go through here and ask those questions to say, circle the events maybe that could maybe be tweaked a bit to be a bit more strategic to lead kids or students in their small group experience with that. Then we would probably even say, if we put all of our events up here, if we were honest for a second, we would probably say there are some events that probably need to go.
Lock-ins.
Lock-ins need to go. Thank you very much. So maybe put an X next to that. Not that you're necessarily going to kill it right away, because again, you're going to have to ask some questions and have some conversations, but just say, is this really helping us get to where we want to be based upon where we want to go? It's like, again, we're going in a very specific direction, trying to lead kids and students. Is this helping us take a step toward that? And then sometimes you may even find like, wow, there's a gap somewhere in a particular season, maybe even summer, maybe sometimes spring. And maybe you might find yourself just for a season, maybe having to add something. Again, you're not adding an event to just add more programming. You're adding an event to say, I see when I put all this on paper and I look at everything in comparison to what's going on, I'm seeing some gaps and steps. And if I'm seeing that gap, then talk about amongst your team to say, what could we do from a programming standpoint to help be a step and to fill in that piece for that, right?
Yeah, and then maybe one other thing that I would add is I think it's helpful, especially the older a kid gets, to think through, what does this look like year after year? So if you're a sixth grader, and you see that event in sixth grade and seventh grade and eighth grade, and then you go to high school and it's the same event in ninth grade and 10th grade and 11th grade, it might get old. So there may be some places here to have events for certain ages and stages and events that build anticipation. So there's more to look forward to the older you get.
I love that you said that, because I would say that's especially true in elementary with the preteen. So as you're looking at programming that you may want to look at, if this is K1, second and third, and fourth and fifth, I may be looking at some special stuff that I'm only going to do for the preteens for that very reason that they have been in our ministry now for 5 or 6 years and was like, oh, we know this event. We've done this every year. We know what to expect. And you want to kind of surprise and delight them based upon that whole thing. So I love that. So again, when it comes to your events, you're transferring all your current events that you know that you've been doing year after year. You're putting them up on this grid to do that based upon the age that you work with. And then you're looking at, okay, where are the spots we need to tweak? What are the things that we maybe need to talk about getting rid of? And what are the steps that we are missing? And the beauty of this exercise with your events is that you're not just putting together programming just to fill in the blanks. You are putting together programming that is helping take your kids and helping take your students down a path that you want them to go. And we would say the best place for that is in the context of a small group. So once you have all of your events listed on here and you've gone through and circled the ones that could be a bit more strategic, put an X next to the ones that maybe we need to have a conversation. Do we keep doing this? And then maybe there are even some additional steps that you might need to fill in. You're now one step closer in planning your ministry year, right?
So, by now, you've got a sheet of paper that's got all of your school and community and church events on it. You have
That's one sheet, right?
That's one sheet. You have
School,
a different sheet.
Right, different sheet.
That has all of your ministry events, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, or K1, 2, whatever your ministry looks like. So you've got school events, church events, you have your events. And now let's talk about what I guess for me is the main event.
The main event.
The teaching calendar.
Yes.
And planning out the teaching calendar for your whole year. Now, I was a public high school teacher for a long time, and part of that was I was a curriculum designer for our foreign language program. And I faced this same reality every year as we were designing the curriculum. We were planning out not only our teaching year, but what does this look like in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. I ran into the same problem. I was a Spanish teacher, and there were too many Spanish words to teach any kid all the words. And some teachers would say, oh, we should absolutely teach them all the words by the time they graduate. And I would say, you don't know all the words. I don't know all the words because Spanish is a big language.
Hola, ¿cómo está?
Súper bien. Hola, ¿cómo estás?
That's all the words I know. That's all.
Muy bien hecho.
Okay, there we go. We're good.
Okay, so we've demonstrated our language skills.
Point
Great.
proven. Okay.
But the point is, there was just too much to teach in order to teach it well. If we wanted a kid to be able to use any of the language that they had, we had to prioritize certain words over other words. And I think the same thing is true when it comes to teaching God's word. The Bible is a big book. There's a lot in there, and it's really important to all of us. But I don't know that it's possible in the elementary years to teach every single Bible verse. I know it's not possible in the middle and the high school years. And so you and I run into this difficult and challenging and very large responsibility of prioritizing what it is we're going to teach in the 30 to 40 times we see a kid each year, which is not a lot.
Not a lot of time. And so I think it's a great exercise to do every year is to talk about, okay, because we have a limited amount of time, what are the pivotal, what are the foundational things that we want a child or a student to know? And here's part of it, and I don't know if this is true in students, but part of what's true with kids is that the gravitational pull as leaders is that we think about, this is what I want kids to know based upon what I know as a almost 46-year-old person on this earth. And so I'm thinking through a completely different lens and filter than the way that a child learns, right? Is that true?
It's unbelievably true in student world. I remember when I was in maybe my second seminary class ever, and I was leading a small group of 9th grade girls, and I sat them down and I said, listen, you need to figure out what it is you believe when it comes to dispensationalism. And they looked at me like, huh? I just want to know if I should hang out with this boy or not, you know? And sometimes, especially as kids get older, because they look like adults, we assume their brains function like adults, and they for sure do not.
And this is where it's important to understand how the mind of a child or a student learns and where they're at and what they understand about the world around them to do that. And so I think that is huge. And so when we talk about this whole idea, what I love about this exercise about teaching is that if you're working together with your student pastor, is that you're understanding, like, if a child enters our ministry in the preschool years and they're a part of our ministry through the high school years, this is the strategy that we're going to start here in preschool, build upon in elementary, build upon again in middle school and high school, and do that. And I love that because, like you said earlier with your group of girls, like, we want to teach in preschool the story of David and Bathsheba, just because developmentally, it makes zero sense to do that. But for the love, I'm going to want you in student ministry for high school years. I'm going to want you to talk about for the next 9 weeks about David and Bathsheba.
Oh, thanks for that.
Well, you know what? You're welcome, but it's the burden you carry, okay? So we have goldfish crackers and poopy diapers.
And we have David and Bathsheba.
And you have David and Bathsheba.
And all the complexities of, great. Thanks for that. That's great.
So it's knowing what matters most. It's the foundational, can't miss. What do we want preschoolers to know developmentally for them, elementary, middle school, and high school, right?
And not only that, but once we prioritize the things that we need to teach, it's important that we start to recycle what matters most, right? Because there are some things that a kid may need to hear more than one time. There are things I need to hear more than one time before I can put it into practice. But also things like love your neighbor looks different in preschool than it does in 3rd grade, right?
Absolutely. So we talk about this in terms of a scope and a cycle. A scope is what we teach, just those things that we determine. These are the can't miss foundational truths that we want in the heart and life of every kid and student. And then the cycle is, how are we going to repeat them again and again so that it drills down in a different way? Because again, going back developmentally, the way that a third grader hears a truth about God, they're gonna hear that in a different way in fifth grade. So we want to understand when we do recycle them, how we're saying them in a different way. Because the best way to help a kid mature in their relationship with God is to help them connect with God in the phase that they're in. That's why thinking how a child thinks, thinking how a middle schooler thinks, thinking how a high schooler thinks is so important. And when you're planning out your content and not just getting up and just start reading from the Bible to do that.
Absolutely. Okay. And I love watching this happen with the girls that I lead when they start volunteering in preschool and they hear truths like, Jesus wants to be my friend forever. And they say, wait a minute, we just talked about that in student ministry. And I'm like, yes, we just talked about that because we recycle what matters most. And you knowing that Jesus wants to be your friend is one of the most important things that you can know as a high schooler. So,
okay, so what is this practically? We've done the exercises now for school, community, and church. That was one piece of paper. We did a separate piece of paper for our events that we're doing. But now on the teaching side, what does this look like again?
So this will come as no surprise.
Let me guess.
Draw the X.
You want to X. Here we go.
Draw
Ready?
the X. Your sound effects
you love
are
that?
excellent.
Well.
And draw some circles.
More circles.
More circles.
How many circles?
And I would say 3. In middle school and high school world, we like to think through, hey, what are we going to be teaching and learning for the next 3 years? Now, there's a whole other video on why 3, but we think 3 is a pretty good number. With preschoolers, maybe it's a little bit less because their brains are changing so fast.
And I say developmentally wise, we would say for preschool, think in terms of a 2-year scope and cycle. And then with elementary, we would say 3 as well to do that. So,
And here's the hack for this one. This is the most important part. Make the inner circle the biggest circle that you have. Make sure you have a lot of space here. We'll get to why in just a second. Make sure you have a lot of space in the middle.
Okay.
But then start thinking, hey, in the next 3 years, what are the big topics I need to hit? So for example, you can't miss spiritual habits. At some point in this 3-year cycle, we need to talk about things like reading your Bible and praying, right? But then there are also, you can't miss generosity. Right. You've got to add generosity in there somewhere. You can't miss the parables. You can't miss wisdom. And so go ahead and fill in your 3 years and where you think those topics might go. Now, I know for us, we've found you can fit in about 4 topics per season.
Got it.
And maybe for you in elementary world, that means months, right?
Yeah.
Every month is a new
Every month
topic.
is a new topic, a new theme. So I would put 3 topics in for this quarter, 3 for this quarter, and so on.
And as kids mature, there may be some topics that you want to spend 5 or 6 weeks on, and some that you only need to talk about for 2 weeks. But typically it averages out to about 4 big ideas in each season. And at this point, maybe 3 years out, you don't need to know every game you're playing. You don't need to know exactly which scripture verse or the title of the series. You don't need to have the artwork done. But we need to have a roadmap for where we're going in the future.
And I think this goes back to the very beginning where we were talking about structure and flexibility. Is that if I can map out the next 3 years and everything goes according to plan, these are the things that I would want to hit on. These are the things that I would want to teach. These are the things. But I also understand that life happens, right?
Sure.
And I may need to deviate from the plan. And instead of talking about this, we're going to go over here. So that's important to remember as you're going through this exercise, because the pressure will be like, oh, I have to figure everything out and make sure everything's filled in exactly and I can't change anything. That's not what we're saying.
Not at all. It's more of, hey, let's fill in these big ideas. And then the beautiful thing is hand it to someone else and say, what am I missing here?
Yeah.
I know one time I filled out one of these for our own ministry and said, here are all the big topics. I think we've got them all. This is everything we think a high schooler needs to know. And someone said, hey, is the Great Commission in there?
It will be.
It will be now. Because it's easy to miss something if you don't have multiple eyes taking a look at what you're teaching. And then we need to talk about this upcoming year. The middle circle represents what are we doing for this upcoming year, beginning in our fall, going through the rest of the school year. And I imagine we need a little more detail than just topics and big ideas. Wouldn't you say so?
I would say so because your senior pastor wants to know what you're talking about. Your parents want to know. Your volunteers want to know. Your team wants to know. And so with this inner circle for this particular year, again, we're going to pretend that the school year starts in the fall for us. And so this is where I would get specific to say, okay, we have the 3 themes. So we have August and September and October, that's going to be our fall quarter to do that. Now, under that theme, what are the Bible stories?
Sure.
This is where I would list out the Bible stories. This is where I would also list out what are our memory verses going to be for each of those different themes. Are we going to have one memory verse a month? Are we going to have one memory verse a week? That's things you need to decide to do that, to write those in. I would also write down what are the key bottom lines that we want to know from each of those stories, or what are the key questions that we want kids to wrestle with that. So this is where we're going to dig down deep and dirty and get into the details of what we're going to do that and write all that in there, right?
Yeah,
In a
and
circle.
I remember planning this even in my public school classroom, planning out all of the big ideas for the year and then drilling down into the details. And I remember every year thinking, I'm not sure this is worth it. Because this is a lot to think through. There's a lot to sort of muddle through and figure out. And then at the end of every year going, that was totally worth it.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that I had that planned out in advance so that I could have some flexibility along the way when plans change. I'm not scrambling figuring out what to do next. Now, if you're an Orange curriculum partner, this may all sound really familiar to you because you know that there's a 3-year scope and cycle, but also at the beginning of each year, you get a 1-year scope document that gives you all the series titles, all the bottom lines, all the memory verses, everything you need to know for your upcoming teaching calendar. You know that if you use our middle school curriculum, you have a fall series called FAM and a comparison series in the fall called This or That. And this is where you would fill that in and make sure that you have your whole year planned out, not only for you, but so that you can communicate that to parents and to volunteers and anybody else who may be a little bit curious. And even if you're not an Orange curriculum partner, we're going to make that 1-year scope document available to you so you can take a look at it as you're brainstorming your ministry year.
Okay, so as we transition to the last part of planning our ministry year, we talked about school calendar, we talked about community calendar, church-wide calendar, we talked about our events calendar, and now we just got done talking about our content. And so let's kind of transition to the last part where we talk about the two major influences in our ministry, our volunteers, which we can't do anything without, and then our parents who we're trying to influence, right? To do that. And so when it comes to those two influences, it's important because here's the thing. Volunteering is hard. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yes. Parenting is hard as well. And as ministries at times, we're great at starting off strong. It's the kickoff event. It's promotion weekend. Rah, rah, rah. Training. And then it's like crickets. The rest of the year.
I feel this all the time. As a volunteer, I have these goals at the beginning of the year. There's a training. We throw a stick in the fire. We say a kid's name. We're ready for the year. And sometime, I don't know, in October, I'm like, do I still have to keep showing up? And I think there's some value, at least on the volunteer side. You can speak to the parent side of sort of re-engaging at every stage.
Absolutely. So it's important because, again, we're great at starting, but it's engaging throughout each of those different quarters that we had. And it's leaning into parents and it's leaning into volunteers to say, what you do matters, hang in there, you're doing an amazing job. And so as we look at trainings and way to engage parents and volunteers, it's important that I think as we go back to the grid, if I may draw an X, can I
draw an X?
Do that? Okay, let me go back to the X here.
So new sheet of paper, draw an X.
We have a new sheet of paper, and so we got and right there. So we have volunteers and we have parents. And so again, we have fall, winter, spring, summer. We're great right here. Like we're great kicking it off. But what I would do is to look at these again, fall, winter, spring, summer, I would almost give them a different word, okay? So I would say fall is our start, right? So we start the ministry year strong, we're engaging parents, we're engaging our volunteers, and then something happens through the fall because school's starting back up, school, sports, and then the holidays hit, and everybody's just like, whoa, what just happened? And January happens like right in here, and with January always comes what? It always comes a restart, if you will. It's like, you know what? I need to recommit to what I made a pledge back here. I need to lose 20 pounds. I need to start doing this. I need to stop doing this. And so we look at this area in the context of parents and volunteers and we say, what are some things that we can do to re-engage them to restart? And then here we would say in the springtime, it's like, you know, school's getting ready to wind down here and things are kind of happening. So we really want parents and volunteers to lean in and focus to do that. So if we have start and we have restart and we have focus, and then comes the summertime, right?
Which is quit, right? That's the word, is quit.
It's quit, it's right. or it's recharge, right? It's like, hey, we're going to recharge, and family vacations or giving volunteers some time off to recharge their batteries to do that. So as you're looking at this on this grid, we want you to go through and list out again, what are you doing right now currently to engage your parents and engage volunteers? And you may find that you're doing the same thing on the same event, or you're doing so many events, and you want to look at this and just say, again, how can we, without planning a big program or a big event every quarter, what are the small things that we can do to engage volunteers?
Right.
I mean, having a text, a conversation, a gift card,
a postcard,
a family huddle. What can we do to lean in the parents to say, you're doing amazing. Hey, we're here for you. Or here's our parent resource library. Maybe it's physical in your church, maybe it's digital, whatever it may be. You just want to look for ways that you can lean in and you can re-engage them. And mapping all this out will how you kind of look at everything and say, okay, kind of what we were talking about with events is to say, where are we falling short? Maybe what can we do and adjust this slightly, or maybe what are something else that we need to do away with right now? So,
and what I love about it, like you said, is we've already done the school and community events, the church events, the student ministry and kids ministry events, and the teaching calendar. And all of those things together can inform these decisions. So for example, I know in the student world, a big thing that happens every spring is we have a sex and dating series on the teaching calendar. And that's something parents want to know about. That's something volunteers want to know about. That's something that both need some language around, some help figuring out what we're going to say next. So there's a clear kind of strategic time for that. Or I know that every year on our events calendar, there's a big weekend retreat. And that it's the first weekend retreat for somebody, whether it's our 6th graders or our 9th graders. That's a great time to get those parents together. It's also a great time to get those volunteers together. And you may notice on the calendar that parent and volunteer training times sometimes line up, not always, but sometimes they do. And when they do, having them in the same room or in the same building for a moment and giving them a moment of FaceTime can pay off dividends later when they need to have a serious conversation and they already know each other's names and faces.
Absolutely, because you could even line up an event to do with volunteers and parents to talk about a phase training, like what, things to expect this year from your 3rd grader, from your 6th grader, from your senior, whatever it may be. And again, the opportunity for parents to meet their child's small group leaders is huge. So again, we're not saying everything on here that you list out has to be an event. What you're just looking for are ways to help re-engage. And again, looking at this not just through the seasons, though that's important, but also start, restart, focus, recharge. In light of that filter, what are some things that we can do to help parents and help our volunteers through this cycle of a typical year? I love doing this because this is kind of the final step in helping us to plan our ministry year. Okay, so we have talked about several things here, Crystal, and they've all been great because it's a great exercise to go through all the different things that we talked about, from school to community to church to our current events to our content and parents and volunteers. So we talked about this in the event portion of this video, and we said a key question with any event is, so what's next? And I'm gonna ask you, in light of everything that we just talked about, and we've got all of our papers, and we've got all of our X's, and we've got all of our circles, and we've got everything written out, what's next?
I think what's next, once we've planned our ministry year, has to be putting that through some lenses and evaluating it and making sure it's as strategic as we want it to be. I think whenever I plan something, I put it through the lens immediately of wherever I am in life, right? I'm a volunteer, so I'm thinking only as a volunteer, or I'm a curriculum leader, and so I'm thinking only as that person, or I'm a teacher and I'm thinking only as a teacher. But there has to be a moment where I put down that lens and pick up a different lens and think from the perspective of somebody else. Here's what I mean. When I look at all of these charts lined up for our own ministry, our events and our school and community stuff and our teaching calendars, when they're all lined up, I have to think through what this means for our staff. Are there moments where there's way too much going on and it's going to be taxing on our staff? Or are there moments where there's less going on and I can slightly move an event or adjust an event and suddenly it becomes less taxing on our staff? Because there's nothing strategic about burning out our staff. And the same thing is true about volunteers. There are moments, right, when volunteers have 5 events to go to in one weekend. So is there a way that I can move that event around a little bit and get it into a space where there's a little more room, a little more breathing room, so that our volunteers are not burned out. And I know that you're a parent, right?
Yes.
So there has to be that lens.
So I have an elementary age child, I have a middle schooler, and so it's looking through the parent lens as well to saying, okay, what's going on in the life of our families during this time and during the spring break time, summer vacation time, and not just that, but just what's going on in the world around us as parents, and that a large portion of that is school. So what's going on with school as far as the homework load, state testing mode, like all that stuff. So you want to pay attention to all that stuff so that you don't put an event on a Wednesday night or a Friday night or a Saturday knowing that kids have been spending the whole week, gearing up, studying, whatever it may be, these testings or whatever, all that, or parents or whatever. So you're just looking through all that through those different filters and lenses.
And then this is my favorite lens to pick up is the lens of an actual kid. Like I love to put on the lens of an actual kid and look at my plan and think about, remember how long it used to feel between Christmases? And now for me as an adult, the time between Christmases feels like seconds. But when you're a 9th grader or you're a 7th grader, that's a long time. And I think the same is true for each season. It's a long time. So thinking as a 7th grader, do I have enough events planned? Do I have enough interesting or moment-making times in my calendar planned for a 7th grader or a 10th grader? Or as a 12th grader, have I seen the same events and the same teaching series over and over and over? Do I need to have something new? So the lens of the kid is a really big deal, and a specific kid is really important. The outsider kid, the kid who maybe didn't grow up in our church, the kid who is new to all this, I think it's important to look at our whole year thinking as that kid. Are there events that don't make sense? Are there teaching series that feel like they're about me and not for me? Are there events where my volunteer small group leader is going to be gone and they're the only person I know? I think we have to think through the lens of every kid and not just the church kid.
Yep. And then I think once you've done that and you've solidified your plan, your ministry plan for the year, I even think there's a communication plan side to this as well, as far as leading up to your senior leadership, whoever that may be. It's also leading out to your volunteers and to your parents. And then, like you said, with your kids and students to say, this is our plan for the year. We're so excited. We've gone through the process. We've thought through all the lens, and then rolling that whole plan out. So.
And wouldn't you say the start of that communication process is really a meeting between somebody like you and somebody like me?
Absolutely.
Between the kids ministry person and the student ministry person.
Yep.
It almost goes back to how we were talking about in the beginning. There are events where we can give each other energy, or where we can pull energy away. We can give each other budget, imagine that, or we can pull budget resources away from each other. I can spend it all before you get to VBS if I want to, or I can make sure that I'm leveraging my volunteers and my resources and my students to give you lift at the time when it matters most for you. And you can do the same for me. So I would say start with your family ministry team. Then have some conversations with some senior leadership, then have some conversations with some parents, then some key volunteers, and eventually the last people to know.
The last.
Should be the students.
Not
the first,
Not
but
the
the
first.
last people to know.
Hey, what do you guys think? No? Okay,
Nope,
all right.
absolutely not.
There you go. All right, so this has been great, going through this exercise. Now, again, we drew our X's and we do our circles, but do I just do that on my own paper? Do we have something that we could help them with that? What do we got?
So we definitely want to write those things out on some scratch paper early on, because we're going to be erasing and marking things out and adding things in. But once the plan is set, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm an Enneagram 3 and I like for things to look pretty on the wall, but I would want to take those plans and blow them up and make them poster size so that if a senior pastor walks in, if an elder or a parent walks in, that I can say, hey, look at our plan for the year. And so we created downloadable posters so that you can do just that. And you'll find those either wherever you downloaded this video or in the description box wherever you're watching this video right now.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. And thanks for hanging out today and having this conversation. This was great, right? And so we hope this has been helpful for you, and you'll find some valuable stuff from the X's and the circles and all the filters and all the lenses and all that stuff will be beneficial as you plan your ministry year. Take care.